The storm of artillery and plasma fire had gone on for so long that Commander Alya Varin could barely recall the quiet hum of peace that Caldoria had once known. The command center, which had once been a testament to Caldoria's proud role in the Galactic Union, was now a crumbling chamber of shattered monitors and sparking consoles. Dust coated the floors, and the overhead lights flickered in a half-hearted attempt to remain operational. Alya, dressed in a scorched uniform with the insignia of a once-thriving planetary defense force, stood at the central hollow table, trying to steady herself. Every fresh tremor from outside threatened to drop additional chunks of the ceiling into the small crowd of exhausted officers. In a corner, Lieutenant Raz Kaur crouched with a toolkit, hands deftly reconnecting the twisted cables of a comm system that had just shorted out. His dark eyes were bloodshot, and there was a gash across his cheek where debris had cut him. Despite all that, his voice carried that familiar ring of dry sarcasm as he said, "Another quake or two, and we'll have the perfect open-air concept for a command center." He grunted as he slammed a panel shut. "Commander, I'm not sure how much longer these systems will hold. Everything's on emergency power and, well, it's not exactly a first-rate job I'm doing here." Alya managed a humorless smile. She was beyond feeling fear or hopelessness in the usual sense. She felt something deeper, a hollow acceptance that they were about to witness the end of Caldoria. "Just keep them running a bit longer, Lieutenant," she said. "I prefer to know the exact moment we lose contact with the rest of the planet, rather than guess." Standing in another console, Ambassador Vine Marek tapped his fingertips restlessly. He wore formal diplomatic attire that had seen more elegant days. One sleeve was torn, revealing the scales beneath. His species, the Ithis, prided itself on calm negotiation skills, but at the moment he looked more like a cornered animal. "There must be some path to peace," he insisted, voice shaking. "We can't fight the Garen with these numbers. The planetary shields are failing. The Garen warships are bombarding our surface day and night, and we have no reinforcements. Surely they would accept a truce, if only to reduce their own losses." "Ambassador," Alya said, her voice as firm as she could make it, "the Garen Empire does not do truces. They've demonstrated time and again that surrender is just an invitation for them to seize what they want and massacre anyone standing in their way. If you truly believe they'll negotiate, then I fear you've studied a different Garen Empire than the one we're facing." Another shell impacted somewhere outside, shaking the entire command center. A few overhead lights blinked out, leaving the room darker still. Raz let out a soft curse and hurried to reconnect more cables. On the primary monitor, a glowing holographic map of Caldoria flickered as multiple red icons advanced. City after city had already gone dark. The entire eastern continent was effectively lost. Only the capital region remained partially fortified, and that was mostly due to luck and the remnants of an outdated planetary defense grid. Alya took a moment to close her eyes. She pictured the bright towers of the capital, the starport, and the wide boulevard that had once been filled with travelers from dozens of species. It had all been a symbol of unity on the outskirts of the Galactic Union. Now, that unity had dissolved under Garen's relentless assault. No reinforcements had come. No allies had answered the call. Everyone was too frightened, too busy, or too indifferent to send help. Sarizan, the communications officer, looked up from her station with an expression that could only be described as grim resignation. "Commander, I've gone through every single channel. Union channels, private channels, even old corporate frequencies. We still have zero responses. Either no one's receiving our distress signal, or they're ignoring it." Alya felt a pang in her chest, a sudden wave of bitterness. "We are supposed to be a proud member of the Galactic Union, and yet, when we need help the most," she trailed off, aware her words were superfluous. Everyone in the room already knew the story. The Zalora coalition was probably too tied up in internal matters to risk a confrontation with Garen. The Thalios Republic was stalling as usual. Others had sent half-hearted messages about how sorry they were for Caldoria's plight, but that was it. Sympathy without action. "We have a few hours left, maybe less," Lieutenant Raz said, a new edge in his voice. The main Garen assault force is closing in on the planetary capital. Our ground defenses are a joke by their standards. They have those giant siege engines that can level entire districts. Ambassador Vian's narrow shoulders trembled. We can't just roll over and die. There has to be someone we can reach. Maybe there's a small faction or rogue mercenary group. Raz arched an eyebrow. Mercenaries won't tangle with Garen. Not unless there's a fortune in it. And we have no fortune to offer, in case you forgot. We can barely keep the lights on. Alya's throat felt tight. She was trying to think of some final gambit that might preserve even a fraction of Caldoria's population. Could we evacuate more civilians? The starport must have some short-range transports left. Maybe one or two, Raz said, but Garen's blockade is up there. They shoot anything that tries to break atmosphere. It's basically a death sentence. The best we can do is shelter people underground and hope a miracle happens. The word miracle hung in the air. Quietly, Vian murmured, well, there is that old rumor about Earth. The entire room seemed to freeze. Not even the sparking consoles or the distant echoes of explosions could break the sudden hush. Sari shifted in her seat. You mean the rumor that humans, those so-called monsters, still have a fleet hidden out there, far away from the Union's core? I thought Earth closed its borders decades ago. Maybe they did, Vian admitted. But I've heard stories that they respond to certain distress calls, that they hate the Garen with a passion. Then again, I've also heard they obliterated an entire star system because someone tried to sabotage their terraforming project. You know how these tales get exaggerated. Raz shrugged. Earth is basically a myth to us. People say humans can crack planets like eggs, that they once demanded entire sets of bizarre terms when negotiating peace, like the right to host something called a barbecue festival in the capital of a conquered enemy. We can't count on a myth. He paused, glancing at Alya. Can we? Alya didn't answer immediately. She recalled reading ancient reports from the older days of the Union, back when humans were more active, stories of their cunning, their unpredictability, and the dreaded name Reaper Fleet. Even so, it had been so many years since Earth had responded to any galactic summons. We already sent our distress signal to every known star system, she said softly, which included the old Earth coordinates out of desperation. If they haven't answered by now, I don't think they will. No one had the energy to argue. The next volley of Garen artillery exploded outside, showering the building with debris. The battered defense grid beeped in alarm, indicating it had dropped below 20% power. The command center's overhead lights flickered more aggressively now. They all knew the end was near. Then, beneath the constant rumble of bombardment, came a sharper noise, a series of bleeps from the main communications console. Sarizan blinked. Commander, we're picking up something on one of the old high-band frequencies. Velocity readings approaching this sector are, that can't be right. It's off the charts. Alya rushed over to the console, her heart pounding. Are you sure it's not a glitch? That equipment's about to die on us. Sari double-checked. I don't think so. I'm seeing multiple objects in fast approach. They've bypassed Garen perimeter sensors as if they weren't even there. She scrolled through the data. They're broadcasting on a code that matches one of the untagged Earth channels from centuries ago. Raz dropped the tool in his hand, and it clattered against the floor. Ambassador Vian let out a tiny gasp. This can't be happening, he whispered. Not now. Not when we're at our last breath. Alya was already patching the feed through. Her eyes darted between lines of data. If that's really them, if that's Earth, then either they're coming to help or they're here to strip the remains. One way or another, Garen might not be our only problem. A new shockwave rattled the building. The command center's structural supports screamed in protest. Above them, cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling tiles, sending more dust swirling. Alya steadied herself. We have no choice. Open the channel. Let's see who's knocking. Sari pressed a few buttons. There was a burst of static, followed by a voice, a deep, slightly amused male voice. This is Captain Cephas Grant of the HSS Revenant, Reaper Fleet. Anyone alive down there? No one spoke for a moment, stunned that the fabled Reaper Fleet had just announced itself, like a casual neighbor. Finally, Alia found her voice. "This is Commander Alia Varen of Caldoria Defense. We're in dire straits. The Garen Empire is bombarding our planet. Our defenses are failing. We sent a distress signal to every ally we could think of, but we didn't think anyone was left who could take on Garen." "Is that right?" came Grant's voice, surprisingly calm and laced with a subtle amusement. "Well, we happen to have some unfinished business with Garen. Let us come in, and we'll see if we can't make them regret picking on your planet. But I'll need your coordinates and any tactical data you've got, and maybe a welcome drink when this is all over." Behind Alia, Raz raised an eyebrow. Ambassador Vian looked as if he might faint, and Sari tried to remember how to speak. Alia cleared her throat. "We, appreciate any assistance. Our capital is about to fall. We can patch the data to you now, although it's incomplete. Our system is on its last legs." "No problem," Grant said. "We're used to improvising. I suggest you brace yourselves. Our arrival can be a little intense." In the background, muffled voices could be heard aboard the Revenant, someone talking about lock and load, and someone else laughing about planetary cracks. Then the channel cut. Alia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was definitely them," she said. "Reaper fleet. The question is whether the legends are true. Can they actually stand up to Garen?" Rez gave a half-smile. "Well, seeing as no one else is answering the call, I'll take a band of rumored lunatics over nothing." Vine didn't seem quite as sanguine. "If the humans are as dangerous as I've heard, we might just trade one conqueror for another." Alia rubbed her temples. "Let's handle that when we come to it. Right now, let's get them everything we have on Garen positions, shield frequencies, whatever might help them, and try not to die in the next hour." They hurried about, sending what meager data they could. Outside, the thunder of Garen's artillery battered the capital in a relentless crescendo. A wave of renewed panic washed through the city, but down in the command center, an odd flicker of hope had taken root. Alia clung to that hope, however irrational it felt. Minutes later, the comm console beeped again, displaying a shaky video feed from orbit. Even with static lines dancing across the screen, the spectacle was unmistakable. A cluster of massive ships had descended upon the planet's upper atmosphere. They were unlike the sleek designs favored by the Galactic Union or the polished brutality of Garen's vessels. These had a patchwork quality, as though built from mismatched modules and retrofitted with layer upon layer of weaponry. Painted on the hulls, in a style both cartoonish and menacing, were images of skulls and scythes, swirling flames, and words in some human script. The Reaper fleet had arrived. The Garen blockade, so sure of its power, began to maneuver. Garen warships formed their standard wedge formation, cannons charging to fire. But the Reaper ships spread out in a bizarre spiral pattern that defied normal tactical logic. It looked chaotic at first glance, yet somehow they navigated with flawless coordination. Even from the battered displays in the command center, Alia could see Garen ships were missing their shots, while the Reaper vessels darted or simply bulldozed past them, returning fire with beams or torpedoes that left the vacuum of space rippling. An announcement from Garen came over the old, open channel. The voice was laced with fury. "This is General Caraxes of the Garen Imperial Armada. Unknown vessels, you are in a restricted zone. Power down or be destroyed." Seconds later, the Reaper fleet responded with a barrage that crippled 3 Garen cruisers in one savage volley. The blasts erupted in fierce balloons of light on the monitor. Raz let out a low whistle. I guess that's their answer. Alia almost felt guilty for the surge of joy that filled her. She'd dreamed of a rescue for weeks, but had never truly believed it would happen. "Focus," she told herself. "We still have ground forces to worry about." On cue, a fresh impact rocked the command center. The lower levels of the capital city were being breached by Garen's advanced ground units. She pulled up a trembling map. Their main division is pushing through Sector 3, heading straight for the Palace District. If they reach that, it's all over. In the next instant, the comm console crackled with Grant's voice again. "Commander Varen, we see your predicament. We're deploying drop pods to your surface. Gonna give those Garen invaders a warm reception." Vine practically choked. "Drop pods? No one uses that method anymore. It's too risky. The atmospheric friction alone. Grant's laugh boomed through the speakers. We like a little risk, Ambassador. Sit tight. My people will rendezvous with your defenders near the palace. Just point us in the right direction. All you didn't argue. The flickering overhead map showed small clusters of Reaper drop pods, each about the size of a one-person capsule, hurtling toward the planet. They glowed white-hot, leaving fiery trails across the sky as they plunged at breakneck speed. Garen anti-air artillery lit up in response, but the pods twisted unpredictably, some even releasing decoys that soared off in different directions. The result was a chaotic swarm that the Garen ground units couldn't fully counter. When the pods finally slammed into the city streets, they scattered chunks of pavement and smoke into the air. Alya's defenders, pinned behind makeshift barricades, initially thought the new arrivals were another wave of Garen weaponry. But then the pods opened. Out of each emerged a fully armed human soldier, their gear bulky but advanced, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Some wore heavy armor that bristled with grenades and knives, while others carried bizarre contraptions that glowed with swirling lights. Each soldier bore the same insignia on their shoulder, a stylized skull with a scythe behind it, the symbol of the Reaper fleet. From her vantage in the command center's battered viewports, Alya witnessed the first clash. Garen troopers rushed forward, their scaled armor glinting, rifles spitting green plasma bolts. The humans returned fire with something altogether more savage. Bolts of compressed energy or projectiles that exploded on impact, scattering Garen squads. The street became a maelstrom of neon pulses, acrid smoke, and the screech of scorched metal. Garen's disciplined formations quickly descended into confusion as the humans advanced with reckless abandon, weaving between cover in a way that looked more like a bar fight than a standard military operation. Yet there was a method to the madness. Every time a Garen squad tried to regroup, a volley of well-placed shots cut them down. Back inside the command center, Alya's staff watched the feed from the city's remaining security cameras in a kind of stunned awe. She heard Lieutenant Raz's breath hitch. They're actually pushing Garen back. I've never seen that happen since this invasion started. A new face appeared on one of the flickering monitors, a human wearing a half-lifted visor, grinning widely. Commander Varen, Captain Shin here, 12th Drop Company, Reaper Fleet. We've linked up with your defense squads near the palace. I'm seeing that the Garen ground force is large, but not too large for a decent fight. He ducked as a plasma shot whizzed over his head, returning fire in one fluid motion. We'll help you hold them off, but how about giving us the location of their biggest, meanest artillery? We'll like knocking out big guns first. Even as more shells shook the building, Alya managed to send the coordinates for Garen's main artillery nest, which was set up a few kilometers north. Captain Shin nodded, mouthing a quick thanks, and barked orders to his team. Then his feed cut off. Moments later, from the vantage of a different camera, Alya could see half a dozen humans storming an enemy emplacement. One of them tossed a device that crackled with arcs of blue lightning, disabling Garen cannons in a brilliant flash. Amid the chaos, Ambassador Vian's eyes were still wide with disbelief. I can't believe they just throw themselves into the thick of it, as though they find it fun. Better them than us, Raz muttered, though not unkindly. Without them, we'd be overrun by now. Outside, the Garen guns that had battered Caldoria from orbit continued to exchange brutal fire with the Reaper fleet. On the main display, the HSS Revenant led an assault on Garen's flagship, a behemoth known as the Venom Claw. Garen's commanding officer, General Caraxes, made a direct broadcast across the local system. You worthless human savages. Your time ended decades ago. The Garen Empire reigns supreme now. Withdraw, or we'll turn Caldoria to cinders. Grant's voice came back, laced with an almost casual confidence. Caraxes, right? Seems I recall you tried something similar near the Gallon Spiral some years back. Didn't go so hot for you then. I'm sure it won't be any better now. The Venom Claw fired a massive beam that scorched through the darkness of space, striking one of the smaller Reaper ships and blowing it apart. The shockwave made even the battered command center's sensor spike. For a moment, No one spoke. Then Grant's voice returned, all trace of humor gone. You'll pay for that. In a display that defied everything Alia had learned about standard fleet engagements, the Reaper ships shifted. They moved into a swirling formation, occasionally colliding with pieces of debris, but seeming not to care. Suddenly, from the underside of the HSS Revenant, a large torpedo-like object launched, trailing arcs of purple energy that twisted around it like serpents. Some Garen vessels tried to intercept, but it was too fast and shielded by an odd distortion field that deflected incoming fire. When it slammed into the Venom Claw's starboard side, it did so without an immediate explosion. Instead, the feed went white with flickering lines as a local gravitational anomaly rippled outward. The screen stabilized just in time to show the Venom Claw tearing open from within, as if reality had folded for a split second, turning the massive battleship into cosmic confetti. The command center erupted in astonished cheers. No one had expected the legendary might of Garen's flagship to be snuffed out so decisively. Alia caught herself gripping the edge of a console, half laughing, half in shock. She looked at Ambassador Vian, who wore an expression of awe and dread all at once. I wonder if we'll live to regret calling them, he whispered. That's tomorrow's concern, Alia replied. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope flare bright in her chest. Meanwhile, down in the streets, Garen's ground forces had witnessed the explosion from above and began to buckle. Morale plummeted. They retreated from several districts, though some squads tried to maintain a defensive line near their landing zones. The humans took advantage of the confusion. Captain Chen's voice crackled through the local commnet. All right, folks, time to drive these lizards into the dirt. Let's go. The command center used what was left of their power to patch local defenders into the Reaper squads. Human and Kaldorian troops coordinated through a rushed mesh of signals. Alia barked orders into the comm, while Raz directed power surges to keep the communication stable. On screen, the images of once desperate Kaldorian fighters now showed them rallying behind the humans, pressing forward block by block. Civilians poked their heads out of shelters in disbelief, some cheering, some crying tears of relief. It took another hour of brutal fighting to secure the major thoroughfares, during which the entire city shook under scattered Garen artillery and the humans' own monstrous ordnance. Streets buckled, towers collapsed, and a few times the Reaper soldiers had to pause to help evacuate survivors from burning buildings. But inch by inch, the Garen lines fell apart. By the time the final Garen holdouts were pinned near the starport, the Reaper fleet in orbit had driven off or destroyed most of Garen's ships. A handful of smaller Garen vessels fled at faster-than-light speeds, presumably to warn the rest of the Empire that Earth's dreaded Reaper fleet was still out there. The battered planet, miraculously, was free of Garen's grip. Commander Alia Varen found herself emerging from the damaged command center into the smoky twilight of Kaldoria's capital. Dust motes floated in the hazy air. Fire still burned in a few places, and the once proud skyline was half ruined. Yet around her, soldiers, some Kaldorian, some human, were helping the wounded, sharing water, or leaning against the rubble in exhausted relief. When Alia tried to thank a Reaper soldier who had just finished patching up one of her lieutenants, the soldier simply grinned. Thank me later, he said. We've still got a planet to patch up. She surveyed the crowds near the palace. A makeshift triage center had sprung up, staffed by medics from both species. Piles of Garen weaponry lay in heaps, confiscated from captured or fallen enemy troops. Over the commnet, a voice announced that General Caraxus's personal craft had been confirmed destroyed aboard the Venom Claw. Garen leadership on Kaldoria was finished. A new wave of something close to euphoria washed over Alia. They had survived. Kaldoria was still standing, albeit wounded. She closed her eyes, inhaling the acrid but liberating air, letting herself savor a moment of triumph she had assumed would never come. A gentle voice startled her. Commander Varen? She turned to see a tall human wearing a battered white uniform marked by an excessive number of medals. He extended a hand. Captain Cephas Grant, HSS Revenant. My people are telling me it's safe to meet in person now. Alya shook his hand, fighting off the instinctive wariness that came from centuries of rumors about humans. He looked quite ordinary for someone rumored to be a planet-scorching barbarian. "Thank you, Captain," she said. "I don't have words to express our gratitude. We thought no one would come. We'd resigned ourselves to annihilation." Grant gave a half-smile. We like to crash a party when the odds are stacked. The Garen Empire's been on our list for quite some time. Looks like we both got something out of this. She studied him carefully, noticing the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. "I heard the stories about Earth about your Reaper fleet. They said you'd vanished, sealed your borders, and left the galaxy to fend for itself." He shrugged. "We had our reasons. The rest of the Union wasn't exactly welcoming toward our methods. After a few incidents, Earth decided to keep to itself. But we've kept an ear out, especially for Garen's movements. They never learn to stay out of trouble, do they?" Ambassador Vian Marek approached, limping slightly on one leg. Despite his residual fear, he summoned enough poise to offer a formal diplomatic nod. "Captain Grant, on behalf of the people of Caldoria, I extend our deepest thanks. We owe our survival to the Reaper fleet. I hope we can repay you in some form." Grant glanced at Vian's torn formal robes, the dust staining his arms. "We're not here to claim your planet, Ambassador, if that's what you're worried about. But maybe we could talk about some mutual defense pacts once you've gotten your people back on their feet. We're not expansionists, if that's what the rest of the galaxy's been telling you." He paused, smirking. "We just have a low tolerance for bullies. And if we happen to like big guns, well, that's just who we are." Alya listened, a mixture of relief and curiosity swirling through her. "I have to ask, do you always fight like that? Drop pods, chaotic flight patterns, weapons that look like they're half improvised." Grant's deep laughter echoed around them. "It works. We discovered that standard tactics are predictable. Garen loves predictability, so we give them chaos. Plus, there's an adrenaline rush. You should try drop pod someday. Once you get over the possibility of slamming into the ground at supersonic speeds, it's almost fun." Razkor and Sarizan, both looking more worn out than ever, stumbled up behind Alya. Raz managed a salute, wincing at the pain in his side. Sari's eyes were locked on the imposing Reaper soldiers distributing water bottles and ration packs to Caldorian civilians down the street. "Is it true," Sari asked softly, "that your Admiralty once demanded a barbecue treaty?" Grant's grin broadened. "Admiral Jackson, about 15 years ago. He insisted that any peace conference with the Zolan people include a clause on proper cooking methods for meat. It was partly a show of intimidation. Zolan delegates were horrified, so they gave us what we wanted. And hey, we got to share some recipes too." Alya stifled a laugh. It seemed so absurd in the context of a war-torn planet. But then again, these humans had just proven that absurd might be another word for effective. She stepped aside, letting a passing stretcher through. The triage center was growing. On the horizon, the last traces of daylight glowed red in the sky, mingling with smoke rising from the battered city. Even in the midst of ruin, there was a new energy in the air. People who had been cowering underground now gathered in the open, discovering that Garen's iron grip had been pried loose. An hour later, as darkness fully settled, the immediate crisis cooled. A lull in the fighting allowed the defenders to regroup. Civilians wandered out to help with repairs or to look for survivors in the rubble. Improvised lamps lit the crumbling streets. Garen artillery was silent now. The Reaper fleet still hovered in the sky above, scanning for any stray enemy ships. Alya established a command post near the palace, setting up folding tables and reusing half-ruined furniture to coordinate the relief effort. Grant joined her there, along with a small cadre of Reaper officers. They placed portable comm devices on the tables, patched into orbital channels. Ambassador Vian hovered nervously, occasionally glancing at the battered overhead architecture, worried it might collapse on them. But all seemed relatively stable for the time being. They worked through the night, exchanging crucial information, lists of casualties, districts still in need of rescue, and the number of Garen prisoners. According to preliminary data, a handful of Garen squads had gone into hiding, but most had been killed or captured. Meanwhile, The Reaper fleet had sustained moderate losses, some pods and a frigate or two destroyed by Garen's heavier beams, but far fewer than one might expect from such a chaotic assault. The real eye-opener, however, was the damage Reaper fleet had inflicted on Garen. A dozen Garen ships destroyed, including 3 of their largest. Their ground forces decimated. The truth glowed from the hollow charts, broadcasting a stark message. Earth's dreaded Reaper fleet had just shattered Garen's hold in a single day, accomplishing what the entire Galactic Union had failed to do for months. By sunrise, the capital's main plaza, once a stately promenade of tall columns and mosaic floors, had turned into a patchwork campsite for the displaced. Human and Kaldorian soldiers patrolled side by side, ensuring no Garen remnants were lurking. In the center, under a battered statue of Kaldoria's founding figure, volunteers handed out emergency rations. Alya could hardly believe the transformation. It was only a day ago that she had fully expected to die beneath a hail of Garen shells. Now, there was laughter, at least in pockets here and there. Relieved children clung to older relatives. Wounded soldiers groaned on makeshift cots, but medics did their best to comfort them. Even in pain and ruin, there was hope. Grant arrived, looking surprisingly fresh for someone who hadn't slept. He handed Alya a small metal container, which smelled strongly of something pungent. "Coffee," he said, "one of our finer human traditions. Not quite barbecue level, but it'll keep you going." Alya took a cautious sip. The bitterness jolted her awake. She coughed, but then took another drink, warming to the flavor. "Thank you," she murmured. "We owe you so much. I don't even know where to start." He shrugged. "We'll talk about what comes next. But first, let's see about clearing out any Garen stragglers and helping your people get to safety. Then we can move on to the diplomatic stuff." Ambassador Vian was already busily scribbling notes. He seemed to have transitioned from cowering diplomat to something of a starry-eyed idealist overnight. Whenever he spotted a human soldier, he'd approach, offering half-baked thanks and inquiring about Earth's stance on future alliances. Alya suspected he was collecting all the knowledge he could, perhaps to show the rest of the Union that Earth wasn't quite the monstrous empire everyone had assumed. During the afternoon, squads of Reaper soldiers spread across the city, accompanied by Kaldorian guides. They cleared rubble, set up field hospitals, and located small pockets of Garen survivors. Some Garen troops surrendered immediately upon seeing the skull insignia. Others attempted a last stand in the city's industrial district, but that defiance was quickly crushed in a pitched skirmish. Alya managed to follow a group to the site, assisting them with local terrain knowledge. She watched humans fight at close range, using shock batons and rifles that fired superheated rounds. They fought with a kind of fearless ferocity that made her wonder how anyone had ever believed them too barbaric to cooperate with. They might be rough around the edges, but their sense of camaraderie was obvious. By nightfall, the planet's capital was free of major conflict. Rescue teams ventured out to the outskirts, where Garen bombardments had devastated farmland and smaller cities. The Reaper fleet hammered down any Garen vessel that tried to slip away. Captain Chun even joked over comms that they were sweeping up the last crumbs. Alya, exhausted to the bone, forced herself to keep going. Sleep would have to wait. In the main plaza, a makeshift celebration began to brew. Human soldiers with portable speakers started blaring music, a strange cacophony of drums and electric guitars, something that startled many Kaldorians but eventually drew them in with curious fascination. Some humans began to dance, removing bits of armor and stomping on broken pieces of Garen plating as if using them for percussion. Kaldorian civilians watched from a distance at first, uncertain whether to laugh or recoil, but then a few brave souls joined in. The swirl of dust, flickering lights, and bizarre music turned into a small carnival of relief in a city that, just the day before, had teetered on the brink of annihilation. Alya spotted Captain Grant leaning against a collapsed statue of some ancient Kaldorian hero, sipping from flask. She approached, ignoring the twinge in her leg from an earlier injury. "Captain," she said softly, "I wanted to talk about the future, if you have a moment." He offered the flask to her. Tennessee whiskey. I'd advise caution, but then again, you survived a Garen invasion, so you can probably handle anything. She took a small sip, choking as the liquor burned down her throat. It felt like swallowing embers, but it jolted her senses awake. She coughed until tears rimmed her eyes, while Grant watched with an amused twinkle. Might take some getting used to, he said. Or a new esophagus, she rasped, handing it back. Anyway, about the future. I'm assuming the Garen Empire won't simply forget about this. They'll regroup. Maybe they'll come at us again. We need allies to stand a chance. Grant's expression turned serious. We don't plan on vanishing again, if that's what you're asking. Earth isolated itself for a while, but times are changing. Too many scumbags out here looking to flex on weaker worlds. We're done pretending it's not our problem. So, yes, if you want an alliance, we can talk. Might need to do some special trade agreements, maybe coordinate a defense pact. Ambassador Vian, who had apparently been hovering nearby, jumped in eagerly. Yes, absolutely. We can formalize it. Caldoria's new status post-invasion might attract more worlds looking to stand against Garen. Perhaps we could host a summit right here, once the city is stable. Grant sipped the whiskey. We can probably arrange that. Our new High Admiral likes the idea of forging alliances directly with frontier planets. And we do love an underdog. Alia glanced around at the Reaper soldiers clapping one another on the back, sharing supplies with hungry families, or laughing at some inside joke. The Union's going to have a meltdown, she said quietly. They've spent decades whispering that humans are unpredictable, destructive, even monstrous. But in one day, you've driven off Garen and saved tens of thousands of our people. He tilted his head, meeting her gaze. Let them whisper. We do what we do, and I won't pretend we're saints. There's probably a few stories about us that are truer than you'd like. But at least we choose our battles carefully, and we don't betray allies. Vian offered a timid laugh. If I'd known you were so direct, I would have recommended seeking your help months ago. But we were taught the old propaganda that Earth was a sleeping beast best left undisturbed. Grant nodded. Not entirely incorrect in some ways. But now that we're here, might as well help rebuild. Our engineers can assist with your infrastructure, strengthen your planetary shields for next time. His grin returned. We can even share barbecue tips if you're feeling adventurous. Alia suppressed a smile. I might stick with your coffee for now. One new taste at a time. As the night wore on, the improvised celebration continued. Some Reaper troops started a bonfire in an open courtyard, using broken Garen crates as fuel. Caldorian citizens and defenders gathered around, trading stories of the day's battles. Over and over, they shared that moment of astonishment when Earth's ships first dropped out of FTL, or when the pod slammed into the streets. Laughter rang out, a cathartic release for survivors who had spent weeks under siege. In one corner, a group of human soldiers tried to explain certain Earth customs to a perplexed Caldorian. Alia caught only fragments. Like a big feast where everyone's invited, marinate the meat for hours. Meanwhile, a few Reaper medics showed local doctors how to use advanced trauma kits that sealed wounds in seconds. The city that had been on the verge of utter destruction just a day ago now resonated with renewal and a sense of wonder. Everyone knew there were dark days ahead, repairing the ruins, dealing with Garen's looming threat, and figuring out the political consequences of forging ties with Earth. But for the moment, they celebrated life. At some point, Commander Alia Varen slipped away to the palace steps, where she found a quiet vantage to watch the flickering fires in the distance. Her leg throbbed. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her drained. Yet her mind still raced with everything that had happened. In less than 24 hours, her world had flipped from despair to hope, all because of a fleet that no one had truly believed would come. She stared at the Reaper insignia on a nearby crate, a white skull painted with swirling lines that gave it a strangely cheerful menace. She tried to reconcile that eerie symbol with the men and women who had risked their lives to save her planet. Commander? She turned to see Captain Grant again, whiskey flask still in his hand. We're shipping more supplies down soon. Fuel cells, portable shield generators, medical gear. Once we're stable here, The Revenant and a couple other ships would do a quick sweep to see if Garen left any nasty surprises in your orbit. Her voice was quiet, reflective. I never expected to see Caldoria survive this. I can't believe I'm saying these words, but we owe the Reaper fleet our very existence. After all those stories about your barbarism, you came to our rescue. Grant's gaze drifted to the horizon, where a faint glow marked the city's perimeter. Sometimes we have to live up to the worst rumors, but other times we do the right thing because nobody else will. We heard your distress call and recognized the Garen frequencies. That's enough reason for us. A debt from years past we still had to settle. She studied his face, trying to read his expression. Do you ever worry about the rumors overshadowing what you're really trying to do? Or do you prefer it that way? Fear as a weapon? He considered the question before replying. Fear can be a weapon, but we're not aiming it at good folks. We aim it at tyrants, at those who trample over smaller worlds without remorse. If some call us monsters, fine, as long as the monsters we fight learn to stay away. The rest, well, they're free to form their own opinions once they get to know us. Alia nodded, a sense of acceptance settling over her. I hope the rest of the galaxy sees it that way too. We can't stay blind to what Earth can offer. The Union has grown complacent, always paralyzed by bureaucracy. Maybe you'll shake them up. Grant's trademark grin returned, though gentler. We tend to shake things up wherever we go. Guess that's just how we're wired. Footsteps approached, revealing Lieutenant Razkor and Ambassador Vine. The lieutenant gave a little salute. Commander, we're finalizing the casualty lists. Our defensive forces took a beating, but thanks to the humans, about 70% survived. That's far better than the alternative. Vi nodded, looking between Grant and Alia. We'll need to sign some official documents soon, at least to formalize Earth's role here in case the Union tries to spin this in some political fiasco. But I figure that can wait until we've ensured the city won't starve in the next few days. Grant shrugged. We're not going anywhere for a while. The Reaper fleet's just as happy to stick around, help with relief, and keep the Garen at bay until you're back on your feet. Raz smirked. You might regret volunteering once you see how much rubble we have to clear. Grant returned the smirk. We've got big guns. They can clear rubble just as well as they clear enemy lines. They all shared a subdued laugh. It wasn't the uproarious laughter of people free from care, but it was real, carrying a sense of camaraderie that bridged two species who had barely known each other a day before. Overhead, the night sky shimmered with the faint outlines of Reaper ships in low orbit, scanning for any sign of renewed Garen aggression. By the next morning, word had spread across Caldoria. The Garen Empire's assault was foiled, and it was the humans who had come. Small crafts from local settlements began arriving, carrying refugees or curious onlookers wanting to see these mythical Reaper soldiers for themselves. Some whispered that Earth's ships fired black hole bombs. Others that the Reaper captains danced with the ghosts of their enemies. Rumors and truths blended, but what mattered was that Caldoria still stood. In the coming days, the city stabilized further. The Reaper fleet provided advanced power cells to restore partial functionality to the grid and helped re-establish communication towers so the planet could coordinate relief efforts. More Reaper drop teams landed, bringing engineers and more medical personnel. The Garen presence on the planet was extinguished, except for a few scattered holdouts who surrendered. A hush fell over the capital each time the unstoppable might of Earth was mentioned, as if people still couldn't decide whether they were more grateful or terrified. Alia took the time to visit a large field hospital set up in the remains of a civic arena. She walked among rows of wounded Caldorians, some sedated, some sitting up and chatting in hushed tones. Reaper medics bustled about, using equipment that knitted flesh and bone with almost miraculous speed. Along one wall, a group of young Caldorian children watched, wide-eyed, as a Reaper soldier demonstrated how a portable stim patch worked. Alia recognized that soldier as Sergeant Harlow, who had personally carried an injured child to safety during the final push. Harlow's face was hard-edged, but the gentleness in her voice while explaining the patch said more than any rumor about Earth's cruelty. Alia's gaze drifted to the battered scoreboard overhead, still displaying the final sporting event that had taken place in the arena before the invasion. She felt a pang of sadness for all that Caldoria had lost. But now there was a path forward. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling the two moments that would forever define her memories: the paralyzing despair when she believed no one would come, and the exhilaration when the Reaper fleet announced its presence. The difference between them was night and day, and it echoed the shift in her heart, from resignation to a cautious optimism. When she returned to the palace plaza, a podium had been erected, fashioned from salvaged wood and half an overturned shipping crate. Ambassador Vian stood upon it, accompanied by Captain Grant and a handful of high-ranking Reaper officers. A crowd of Caldorians, civilians, soldiers, officials gathered to listen. Vian cleared his throat, scanning the silent faces. "My fellow citizens," he began, voice still showing signs of strain but rich with emotion, "we have endured the unthinkable. We have lost so much: friends, family, homes. Yet against all odds, we are still standing here in our capital. It is a testament to our resilience, but also to the extraordinary intervention of the Reaper fleet from Earth." He gestured to Grant and his officers. "Stories about humans have circulated our galaxy for generations, painting them as fearsome, unpredictable warriors. I suppose some of that is true, but we have also seen compassion and bravery that has saved countless lives." There was a smattering of applause, hesitant at first, then growing. Alia stood on the edge of the crowd, near Raz and Sari. She felt tears burning in her eyes, though she kept them at bay. For a fleeting moment, she wished those so-called allies in the Union could see this scene, to witness how the dreaded humans had done what none of them dared. Vian's voice rose. "In the coming days, we will begin rebuilding. Let this day be remembered not just as the end of Garen's assault, but as the dawn of a new alliance. Captain Grant and I have already discussed a preliminary defense pact, and we will invite other worlds to join us, if they have the courage. Caldoria will not stand alone ever again." A roar of approval spread through the plaza. Vian stepped aside, and Grant took the makeshift podium. He surveyed the crowd. "We're not big on speeches," he said, "but this is a special moment. A lot of people in this galaxy wrote you off. A lot of them wrote us off too, thinking we were bogeymen to be avoided. But we showed up, and you fought alongside us. That makes you something more than just a planet we happen to save. It makes you our friends. And we humans don't abandon our friends." The applause erupted again, mingled with whoops from Reaper soldiers who had gathered around. Someone blasted a short riff of music, eliciting chuckles. It struck Alia how quickly the tension had turned into fellowship. The silhouette of Reaper ships still hung overhead, powerful and intimidating, but now they carried with them the promise of safety rather than doom. Grant finished his short speech with a wry grin. "Now, if you'll excuse me, we still have some Garen hardware to blow up. And I believe we owe your city a proper barbecue." Laughter and cheers followed. After the short ceremony ended, the crowd began to disperse, many clumping together in excited conversation. Families reunited, old friends embraced, and soldiers from different worlds clapped each other on the shoulder. A few Garen captives were led away under guard, though the Reaper officers promised they would be treated according to recognized war protocols, something Garen had never done for their own prisoners. Alia approached Grant, who was stepping away from the podium, to shake his hand. "Captain, I want to personally thank you. Without the Reaper fleet, Caldoria would be a memory by now." He squeezed her hand briefly. "You're welcome. And hey, your people fought hard too, even when you had almost no chance. That grit is something we respect." Raz and Sari joined them, looking curious. Sari said softly, "I still can't believe Earth exists after all. The Union used to say you'd gone silent. Rumors spread that you were plotting to conquer the galaxy, or that you destroyed yourselves." Grant shrugged. "Some humans probably would like to conquer the galaxy, but we keep them in check. We fought each other for centuries back on Earth, you know. By the time we got out into space, we'd learned enough about war to know it's not something you pursue unless you have no choice. But if the Garen come for you, we will fight back. That's how we see it." Raz smiled. "I'll drink to that." provided you don't try to feed me that whiskey of yours again." One sip was more than enough. Grant chuckled and gestured around. "Well, you'll have plenty of time to decide. We're sticking around for the rebuilding phase. My engineers want to test some new shield designs on your planetary grid, if that's all right." Alia nodded eagerly. "We'll take any help you can offer. The city needs everything from fresh water supplies to stable power and, well, demolition of all the collapsed structures. We have so much to do." With that, they parted ways for the moment, each heading off to tackle their duties. Over the next weeks, the Reaper fleet established a semi-permanent presence in Caldoria's orbit. Captain Grant and his officers met frequently with Ambassador Vine to draft what would become the Caldoria Earth Defensive Accord. Their leadership had no illusions about Garen letting this humiliating defeat stand forever, so they made sure Caldoria would be well defended when Reaper vessels inevitably had to move on. Despite the seriousness of the tasks at hand, pockets of humor and camaraderie flourished. Some Reaper soldiers insisted on hosting a small victory feast in a half-destroyed courtyard. They roasted local fauna on crude grills, seasoning it with earth spices that made the Caldorians' eyes water. Yet more and more locals showed up out of curiosity, forming a line to try the bizarre human cooking, while the humans happily devoured Caldorian fruit dishes in return, pretending not to cringe at the unfamiliar textures. Caldoria's citizens, for their part, found themselves enthralled by these towering, heavily armed visitors who, between bouts of terrifying battle, joked and partied like there was no tomorrow. And maybe that was the truth about humans. They lived as though any day might be their last, and so they refused to waste a single moment. Alia, roaming the makeshift festival, marveled at the fact that she could now walk among survivors, smiling with them rather than planning funeral pyres. It was late one night, after finalizing a new training schedule for Caldoria's defenders, that Alia found a moment of peace in the palace's battered garden. Captain Grant was there, resting on a broken marble bench, sipping from his flask. He raised it as if in salute. "Commander," he said softly, "looks like you're doing well. How's the leg?" She took a seat beside him, exhaling. "Better. Medical patches are miraculous. Another week, and I'll be back to full duty." "Thank you, by the way. Your medics have been incredible." He shrugged. "We learn to patch people up fast. Comes with the territory." In the distance, fires from a salvage team glowed against the dark sky, where shapes of Reaper vessels were visible if one looked closely. Alia felt the slight ache in her muscles, but it was a good ache, a sign of life continuing despite everything. "I can't help but wonder how the galaxy will change once word spreads that Earth has reemerged," she said. "The Union might panic. Garen will hate you even more. Others might flock to you for protection." Grant gazed upward. "Yeah, it's going to be complicated. But we prefer complicated to letting bullies rampage freely. Besides, if it encourages worlds to stand up for themselves, I'd count that as a win." She studied his profile against the dim light. "Is that what motivates you? Stopping bullies? Or is it vengeance on Garen?" "Little of both, I guess," he admitted. "In the end, we do what we have to. There's no grand design. Just a bunch of folks who fought our own share of wars and don't like seeing others steamrolled." Alia leaned back, letting her tired eyes close for a moment. She could still hear the hum of activity in the city, but it was a more hopeful hum now. Reconstruction and renewal, not bombardment. "Well," she said softly, "whatever your reasons, I'm glad you showed up. You gave us something no one else did." "What's that?" She opened her eyes and smiled. "A future." They stayed there in companionable silence for a long moment, each letting the events of the past days settle into memory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, negotiations, planning for the next Garen incursion, rebuilding the starport, and forging a permanent alliance. But for now, on this cool night, amid broken marble columns and half-dead shrubbery, the commander of Caldoria's defenses and the captain of Earth's most feared fleet sat side by side, quietly sharing a moment of triumph that no one could ever take away. In the weeks and months that followed, Caldoria became a symbol for the entire region of the galaxy. Word spread like wildfire. The Reaper fleet had broken Garen's siege. Worlds that had once been too frightened to defy Garen began to murmur about uniting. Others, still wary of Earth's reputation, watched from the sidelines, trying to reconcile the brutality of the Reaper's weaponry with reports of them distributing food and medical aid on Caldoria. The name Reaper Fleet took on a new dual meaning. Yes, they would be feared, but perhaps not by those in need of protection. Ambassador Vian worked tirelessly, inviting diplomatic envoys from neighboring star systems to come witness Caldoria's revival firsthand. Many arrived, stepping gingerly through half-rebuilt streets, wide-eyed at the sight of humans patrolling side by side with Caldorian troops. Some of these envoys had once dismissed Earth as a relic of a darker era. Now they found themselves listening with rapt attention as Vian extolled Earth's courage, and Reaper officers explained how they'd integrated older Union tech with their own brand of wild innovation. Commander Alia Varen continued to head the new Joint Defense Force. She had effectively been promoted to lead Caldoria's reconstruction efforts, though she insisted on rotating home for a few hours of sleep when possible. She was in the palace courtyard one afternoon when she received a personal comm from Captain Grant. His holographic image stood before her, arms crossed. "We've detected Garen movement on the outer fringes," he said. "They're regrouping. Might be just a recon force. Might be a sign of a bigger strike. Either way, we'll handle it if they come knocking." Alia glanced at the partial walls behind her, new scaffolding rising to support a half-rebuilt corridor. "We're stronger every day," she said. "But I won't say no to backup." "Thank you, Captain." He gave a small salute. "That's what friends are for, right? Keep that whiskey I gave you on hand. Once we're sure Garen's out of the picture, we'll have a real celebration." The comm blinked out. Alia realized she was smiling. Friends, she thought. How remarkable that the name once uttered in hushed tones of dread was now an anchor of hope. That evening, with the setting sun casting a burnt orange glow across the battered city, Alia surveyed the progress. Buildings were slowly being patched up. Fresh supplies from the Reaper fleet had arrived, including advanced construction drones that hovered and welded beams with machine-like precision. Children ran through the streets, chasing each other around broken columns, their laughter echoing off scorched walls. Caldorian troopers, once battered and demoralized, now carried themselves with renewed confidence as they traded war stories with human marines. The air was still thick with dust and the lingering odor of burnt metal, but no one seemed to mind. Ambassador Vian passed by, practically glowing with excitement. He had apparently scheduled a grand meeting for allied diplomats next week, in which the formal Earth-Caldoria Pact would be unveiled. Whether that event would transform into a bigger galactic alliance remained to be seen. But for now, it was enough that Caldoria would not be alone. Later, that night, Alia found a quiet vantage point on a newly reinforced balcony that overlooked the main plaza. She watched the swirl of people, the bobbing lights of torches and portable lamps, and the imposing silhouettes of a few Reaper ships in the sky. Her mind wandered back to the day the Garen bombardment had nearly shattered their last hope. She recalled how she had stared at a flickering console and believed it would soon be her tomb. They had thought no one would come, that they were utterly forsaken, that the galaxy had turned its back on them. But Earth arrived, like a legend made real, carrying with it an unorthodox sense of humor, terrifying weaponry, and an unwavering willingness to face down the galaxy's bullies. They had changed Caldoria's fate in less time than it took most alliances to argue over a trade route. And now, whenever Alia glimpsed the Reaper Skull emblem, she felt gratitude rather than dread. She allowed herself a final moment of peaceful reflection before returning to her duties. This story was far from over, but she knew how it would be recounted. The day the Garen Empire nearly crushed Caldoria, only to be cast out by those once labeled as cosmic devils. It was a story of improbable salvation, of forging an alliance with the very force so many had feared. Perhaps it would echo across countless worlds, inspiring them to reconsider what they thought they knew about Earth, about the Reaper fleet, about hope itself. In that hush before she descended the stairs, Commander Alia Varen closed her eyes and whispered a silent promise to the planet she served. Caldoria would rebuild. They would honor the sacrifice of those who had fallen. And if anyone ever asked what turned the tide, she would tell them simply, "We thought no one would come," until Earth's most feared fleet arrived. And that day, the impossible became our new reality.